Welcome back, everybody. It's November, so our reading week is over. So today is lesson 7. I marked everybody's assignment 2. You can see the marks here. Overall, the assignments were really well done. Class average of 79, which is quite high. I don't think the assignment was that difficult, but I was really happy with the quality of the work overall and the projects that I got. So that's excellent. So what are we doing today? We are going to go over assignment 3. We're going to do a quick review. I know we talked about SSL back in our PHP class, but that was quite a while ago. It was probably 6 months since we've had that conversation. So we'll do a quick review of what SSL is and how it's involved in web application security. And then we're going to look at third-party authentication. So we're going to kind of do this in 2 parts today. The first part is we're going to integrate Google Sign-In into our online store. And then you'll have a lab, and you'll have the option to complete the lab either on your own or with up to 2 classmates. It's your choice. And the lab is going to be for you to implement Facebook authentication into the online store. So I'm going to allocate time in class. You can do the lab in class today and ask me for help. You're also free to do the lab on your own after class if you like. If you're watching the lesson asynchronously, that's fine. You have until next Sunday to submit the lab. Okay, so let's have a look at assignment 3. Now, I'm moving the due date back. Originally, I had assignment 3 due next week. It's not all that long of an assignment, but I'm going to give you 2 weeks. So rather than it being due on Sunday, since you already have the lab due, we're going to move this down. So you have 2 weeks to do assignment 3. It's only worth 10%. Shouldn't be too time consuming, but we'll go over the requirements. Happy to take any questions. So assignment 3 is an extension of assignment 2. You're going to take the app that you submitted and then I've graded, and you are going to implement some security measures. It's worth 10%. And again, the due date, rather than being, whoops, I guess I should update this. The due date is November 14th. So let me just re-upload that to D2L so that you've got the correct date in the document. Okay, so you have 2 weeks to do this. Bear with me for a second. I'll just upload, re-upload. So on D2L, all you need to submit is your same repository link. You don't need a new repository. And in terms of your hosting, you now have 2 choices. If you still have Azure credits, great. You can just give me the same Azure link. I know many people no longer have Azure credits. That's fine. You have another option. I'll put the link in the chat. We can have a look at this site. So student in one of my other classes found this site, smarterasp.net. So this is asp.net hosting. And they give you a 60-day trial with no credit card. So I've had a couple students use this service already. So you can create an account and it will give you access for 60 days, which would be enough time to get us through the end of our semester. So if your Azure credits have expired, then you can simply open up, create a free trial, and redeploy your web application and recreate your SQL Server database here. This host, it doesn't support GitHub integration, so it doesn't have the continuous deployment like we did with Azure. So in order to get your web application online, you would be using FTP the same way you would have done in our PHP class. Hi, Adil. I did. Thank you. I hope you did too. Okay, so this is an option for you, no cost option, in the event that your Azure credits run out. You do have to do your own work. I think that goes without saying at this point. So what you're going to be doing is enhancing your second assignment by adding both local and social authentication. So you're going to, as we did in class, our last class before reading week, you're going to disable the account confirmation emails for new user registration. You're going to register a new account for me with this username and password. So that way I do not have to register on 29 accounts. I can just log in with this credential on everyone's site. You're then going to take your existing assignment 2 and you're going to modify it so the ability to add, edit, and delete data is only available to authenticated users. So our assignment 2, all your CRUD operations in most of your assignments, they're public. Anybody can just come to the site and add, edit, or delete data. For assignment 3, anonymous users can only view your data. They do not have access to the links to create, edit, and delete, nor do they have access to those methods and views. You're also going to enable social authentication with Google. We're going to do this in class today. You will store your API keys that we're going to generate in the Google Developer Console. You can store those in your app settings.json file. And then you will commit to GitHub and publish your site to Azure or Smarter ASP. And this is not a long assignment, but 2 weeks should be plenty of time. So you are evaluated in part on implementing the authentication, that your site becomes read-only for anonymous users. It requires somebody to log in order to change, add, or delete data. Marks for your Google login, version control, deploying to the server. So the focus here really is on authentication. You're not required to implement authorization with different rules and permissions. Not required. If your application needs it, that's fine, but I'm not requiring you to have different rules. Only that an anonymous user can only see the data and an authenticated user can change it. And again, due on Sunday the 14th. Are there any questions about the assignment and the requirements? Grab my chair.
Hey, Prof.
Yep.
I just wanted to ask, so for this assignment, do we only make one role of just admin, or
You
are we
don't need
supposed
to
to make
make
like...
any roles in your project. Roles are not required at all.
Oh, okay, I understand.
It's simply there's anonymous users who can read the data but can't change it, and there are authenticated users who can add, edit, and delete. That's it.
Oh, okay. Okay, I understand. Thank you.
I mean, I realize that some students, based on the project they're building, they might have a need for different roles. And if the project you've built uses roles, that's okay. But I'm not requiring, it's not required.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody else have a question about the assignment? All right. I should. Okay, I think I've updated the data already. for our next little activity, actually, like I said, this is actually going to be a review of something that we talked about in our last class, which is SSL. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to follow this link here, this item here in the week 7 folder on D2. It says, what do you already know about SSL? So you can go to the Padlet link here. You can log in with your Lakehead, your Google account. And once you're signed in, I want you to jump over to this Padlet board and add a sticky note explaining. So just click the plus button here. And I just want you to create a little note about what you know about SSL. It's a bit of a review that we talked about last semester. And maybe you could also add your name to the note. All right, thanks, Mason. So we talked about SSL last term. What do you remember? All right, thanks, Luke. That's right. It's about establishing authenticated and encrypted links between different computers across the network. Yep. It's a great answer. I'll just pause the recording, give you a few minutes to contribute here. Okay, so I'm seeing some thoughtful, some useful comments and info here, right? So our SSL certificates, so we talked about last semester, HTTP, normally all messages exchanged with HTTP are just sent in plain text. So when you enter, let's say your username and password on a login screen in your browser and it goes to the web server, that traffic by default is not encrypted. So any hacker that interrupts that traffic, they can easily read any of the input. And maybe, you know, the web server is from a financial institution. It's sending back things like account numbers and account balances. Again, we want that text to be encrypted instead of sending plain text. Andreas says it provides a digital document, provides the identity of a website to a cryptographic key pair consisting of a public and private key. Yep. So it uses these keys to verify the identity of the website and encrypt that traffic being passed back and forth. So this is part and parcel now of everyday best practices. Coming to Owen's point about any website we build, even if that website doesn't actually handle important information. And I put up another link here. So this article is a few years old, but it explains some of the importance of SSL. So it's got some good description here about how it works, that it marks, browsers will indicate your site is secure. It'll show you the certificate verifying authority. Describe some ways to get SSL. And this is particularly installing SSL for WordPress. But the other thing is that this also affects your search engine rankings. Sites that have SSL certificates are going to rank ahead of sites that don't, in addition to those sites being marked as not secure by modern browsers. So this is the reason why whenever we've created new projects in ASP.NET, we've always enabled the HTTPS option. And if we open up, I'm going to open up Visual Studio and open up our last chapter bookstore. And we can see just where that HTTPS gets enabled. Megan, it's not on by default. There honestly, in 2021, there really isn't a scenario that you wouldn't want it, to be perfectly honest with you. So when we check that box, it adds this code right here. It adds use HTTPS redirection. So what that means is if we get a request, I'll show you what this is like in action. So here, for example, on the Elegant Themes website, if I try to load this page without HTTPS, it's forcing requests to always use HTTPS. So it's enabled. So there is no way to load the site without getting the encrypted version of the page with HTTPS. So we should always be enabling it, even if we're just building a static site. We want our browsers to mark the site as secure. We want all requests to use the SSL certificate. And we also want search engines to recognize that our site has SSL. So anytime you're publishing a website, we should ensure that SSL is enabled on it. And depending on where we're hosting the site, sometimes we have to pay for SSL. Sometimes SSL is free. Many hosts nowadays support this free service. Let's Encrypt is a nonprofit certificate authority where you can actually get SSL certificates for free. Not all web hosting companies will support this, however. For example, if you host at GoDaddy, their cheapest SSL certificate start at about $85 a year. So, and they will not allow you to install a free Let's Encrypt certificate. So when you're hosting, you'll want to check out what kinds of SSL options they have available for you. And this is something typically you don't pay as a web developer. If you have to pay for it, your customer would pay that charge. Typically, you would buy and install the certificate, and you would pass that cost on to the owner of the website to pay for it. And we can see as well, if I run the last chapter, when you run yours, you'll notice something about all of the port numbers for all of your .NET applications. 443 is actually the default SSL port. So this is why any website we run in Visual Studio where we've enabled HTTPS, the port is always going to start with 443. Because that means it is running with HTTPS. Okay, so we don't really need to do anything more with this, but I know we talked about it quite a while ago. We've enabled it in Visual Studio, but we've never really discussed why we're doing it and sort of how it works and what the importance of it is. Because you haven't talked about it for months and months. So I just wanted to spend a few minutes reviewing that so that everyone's clear on what HTTPS is and what it does for us. So thank you for those of you who contributed the comments to the Padlet board. Okay, we're going to proceed on to our next part of our second security lesson, and that has to do with enabling third-party authentication. So when we go to our register page, we get the pre-built form, and we've really been dealing with this section. We overrode some of the code in the default page so that when we registered new accounts, those users automatically went into the role of customer. We haven't looked at this other piece here, this use an external service for authentication. And there's an article here, which I've also linked to here on D2L, giving you the direct link. So this is a little tutorial about integrating Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Twitter, and other providers. And this starts right from scratch from building a brand new application. So I've kind of adapted this a little bit, and we're going to go through the process together of implementing Google Sign-In. I'll give you a quick walkthrough of what it is we're going to do, and then we'll go through it together. Okay, these slides are on D2L for you. So the first thing we'll need to do is we'll need to set up a set of API credentials with Google. So we're going to go to the Google Developer Console shortly. We're going to create a project there, and we're going to generate a set of API keys. That'll be step one. And there's a few screens, a few parts, a few steps in the process in the Google console. So we are going to create a set of API credentials, and we'll have to configure the consent screen. So when the Google login box comes up, there's some options we'll need to populate in terms of configuring that screen. We'll have to choose that our login type, which will be external, which means any Google account. If we chose internal, for example, we could limit it to the lakehead.edu domain if we wanted to, or lakehead.ca. We'll just configure the consent screen. We'll have to put in an application name, email of our Google account. And then we are going to create an Oauth client ID. And then we'll also have to add in redirect URIs. So when a user clicks sign in with my Google account, the user gets taken to Google. But once they log in successfully with Google needs to know where do we send them back to? What URL on our site does the user come back to afterwards? So it'll be our domain followed by /signin-Google. And then we're going to need to grab our client ID and client secret that we created in the Google panel. We're going to need to add these to our application. And there's a couple ways of doing this. The most secure way is kind of two steps. Locally, we use our Windows Key Vault, but that means we have to add them separately in Azure. I'm not going to go through that process just because I know many people no longer have access to Azure. If you're using Smarter ASP, it's probably, I don't think it has that same config section. So the simpler way, it's not as secure, but for our purposes, it will work, is we'll add these credentials just to appsettings.json. And then they should work both locally and on the server. If you want to read about how to use the Key Vault in the Azure configuration section, it's outlined here in the tutorial, how to do this. Just to keep it simple, we're just going to use appsettings.json. I've also described it in these slides, how you would use the Windows Key Vault and how to do it in Azure. So if you wanted to, you can reference these slides. If you still have access to Azure, you can try this method. And then inside our .NET app, we're going to need to install a Nuget package. We're going to need to install the Google authentication package for .NET Core. And then we'll need to configure it in our startup file. So when our application loads, we'll want to configure Google. And then on the registration page, this message here, this message should disappear. And instead, we're going to have a Google button that automatically gets displayed here that we can then try out. And after we've logged in, we should see a screen similar to this. It says, you've authenticated with Google, and just asking them to confirm their account. And then that will get added. Once we finish registering, the new user doesn't go to ASP.NET users. It goes to a separate table. It goes to ASP.NET user logins, where it will generate a user ID, but we'll know that that user came from Google. So we're going to go through this whole process together. And then you're going to have a lab where you're then going to work on adding Facebook login, which is 90% the same process, a few slight differences with Facebook. And you're going to add Facebook login as well to your bookstore. And you'll be able to do that either in a group of 2 or 3, or if you prefer to do the work on your own, you'll be able to do it on your own, whatever you prefer. Okay, so I'll come back and refer to these slides kind of as we go. So make sure that you've got your last chapter project running. I'm going to close up most of our files that we've got open. I've actually got the code, the C# code for the register page. I've got it open from last class when we added some code here to save all new users to the customer. So we can actually see the code in here. So this is where any external logins, if we've configured them, when the page loads, it actually checks if we've got any external login providers here. And if it does, if we have any, then these are going to be displayed. So here's the logic. It says if our external login count is greater than, if it's equal to 0, it just shows this message. Otherwise, it loops through each provider and generates a login button. So we'll get a Google button enabled here together, and then you'll get the Facebook working for your lab. So step 1 is we need to go to the Google Developer Console. So I'll put the link in the chat. The link is also on D2L for you. So you can see the link right here as well under Oauth setup links. There's the Google. So it's console.developers.google.com. You do need to use a Google account to log in. Everybody has one, I know. You can always use your Lakehead account, personal Google account, doesn't matter. So we'll go here. Now, I was playing around with this the other day. Oh, thanks, Mason. Console.developers.google.com. Yep. Thank you. So it will always default to the last project you had open. So I was creating a test project over Reading Week. You probably don't have any projects here. So I'm going to go and click on it, create a new project, which I will call the last chapter. So if I was going to integrate other additional Google APIs in here for our bookstore, I could put it all in one project. So go and create a new project. So that's step 1, is create a new project, and I'm just going to open up my last chapter project. Once you're in here, we can click on credentials over on the left. It says we've got no API keys to display, no OAuth clients to display, no service accounts. That's fine. We are going to create credentials. I'm going to click this plus button. If you're behind and you need me to wait for a minute for you to get caught up, please let me know. Sure. If the organization, Megan, I thought the organization was optional. I didn't put anything in. If you have to put in an organization, you can just type Lakehead. But it should be optional. Okay, Luke, were you able to create the project? Okay, yeah, if it defaults to Lakehead, it's fine. Ivan, the organization doesn't matter. You can leave it blank or you can use Lakehead. Ah, okay, thanks, Adam. So on your personal, it was required, and with Lakehead, it became optional. Got it. Yeah, the organization is not really important, so if you have to put Lakehead in there, that's fine. Okay. Great. So we'll click on the create credentials, and we want this. We want an OAuth client ID. And it says to create an OAuth client ID, we must first configure our consent screen. That's fine. So click this blue configure consent screen button. We are going to set the user type to external. If we picked internal, it would be only the people in your organization could log in. We don't care about that. We're going to say any Google account is fine to log in to be a customer in our store. So choose external as the user type, click create. And now there are a few screens here. And you can see over on the right how this will look in the pop-up Google login box. So the display name, we'll say the last chapter. Put in your own email address. You can use your Lakehead or a personal Google email, doesn't matter. And then you also need to put in, again, the developer contact info. So you can leave the rest of the screen blank. You just need the app name, the user support email, and the developer contact email. That's it. If we had a domain name, like if we were running this at thelastchapter.ca, we would add it here, and then we need to go through a verification process to prove to Google we own that domain. We don't need to worry about that for now. So we'll just hit save and continue. I'm not sure if we need to add a scope here. I think we can. Scopes express the permissions. So basically, how much info about someone's Google account are we getting? Click on add or remove scopes. And let's just check the first one. We basically just need their email. We don't care about the rest of their Google account. We don't need any of it. So we'll check off the first checkbox here, which is the auth userinfo.email. And then if you scroll down to the bottom, there's a blue update button. You can just click it. And then we can click save and continue. We're not going to worry about test users. We may, when publishing status set to testing, only test users are able to access the app. I'm just wondering if we need to do this. Okay, probably not the worst thing. So go ahead and add a Google account that you have as a test user. I'll use another Google account I own. And then you can just save and continue. So I think we are done here. And I should be able to go back to the dashboard now. So I'm also just going to publish it. Which will make it available to any user with a Google account. So you'll want to do this in assignment 3. Otherwise, I won't be able to try my Google login in your assignment. I'll just confirm that. So now my app is in production. So I probably didn't even really need the test user. So I finished the OAuth consent screen. Now I should be able to go and create my set of API credentials. I toggled the publishing status from testing to production. So I think you have a button here that says publish. You can click on it and then confirm. And I'll definitely want you to do that in your assignment. So once it says the status is in production, we can go back to the credentials link on the left. Now that we've configured the OAuth consent, it'll allow us to create the API keys that we need. So I'll use this create credentials button that we clicked before, but it didn't let us go through that process first. It forced us to go through the OAuth consent screen first. Done with the OAuth consent screen. Now we can try to create the credentials, and we're going to pick an OAuth client ID. So Google wants to know what kind of application are we building? Well, we'll pick the first option, which is a web application. It gives it a default name of Web Client 1. That's fine. The other thing we need to do here is add our redirect URIs. So where does Google send the users after authentication? So I'm going to click Add URI. And what I'm going to put in here is my local host. So what have I got? 44398. So your port number is probably different than mine. And then the URL will be /signin-google. So I'm going to put this in the chat, but I'm replacing the XX. So I'm replacing 98 with X's. You'll have to fill in. You will replace the X's with your own site port number. So for me, I've got 44398. Probably everyone else in the class has a different port number for their project. So I'll click Add URI, and then I can click Create. So you're going to need to do this in your assignment, but you're also going to need the URI to your live site. So if it's running on Azure, it will be your Azure site /signin-Google. If you put it up on smarterasp.net, it will be whatever URL they give you with the suffix of /signin-Google. And then you can just click Create. And this is going to give you a little pop-up confirmation window saying your client has been created. And here's the client ID and the client secret. So here are our API keys. So we're going to need these values. We're going to need to put them into our appsettings.json file. So I'm going to leave this screen up and visible so I can copy these credentials. So we've basically done the work we needed to do in the Google console. The rest of the work now is done in our Visual Studio project. So we created the credentials. We picked an Oauth client ID. We just kept the default name. And then we added the redirect URI that I put in the chat. Again, it's your local host, 443, with the rest of your port number, /signin-Google. I'm going to go back to Visual Studio. And now I want to open up the app settings JSON file. And I'm going to add a new section here. So on my line 12, I've got right now the last node here is allowed hosts. I'm going to put in a comma. And I'm going to create an authentication section. Oops. Within here, we're going to create a Google section. We'll paste in our API keys. And then later, you'll use this same section to add your Facebook API keys as part of your lab. So I'm going to create a Google section. And inside of the Google Authentication section, we're going to add two values, client ID and then I'll put in a comma and client secret. Okay, so here's the code that I've added. I will put it in the chat. All this code goes before the final closing bracket. The next step is going to be to copy the client ID and client secret values from the Google Developer Console and add them to our app settings. So I will copy my client ID and add it. It's going to end with apps.googleusercontent.com. And then I'm going to copy the secret, which is a shorter string, and paste that in here. So in a real production environment, we probably use the Windows Key Vault instead of hard coding these credentials in here. But for our purposes, this is going to be acceptable to put them in app settings.json. Okay, so Adam, in this window, it shows me both. Here's the client ID, here's the client secret. If you close this screen, I'll show you how to get it up again. So if you don't have that pop up, right here, you can go back to the credentials section. And you've got this web client ID. Here's the client ID. You can, if you edit it, the secret is here. You can also regenerate a new client secret or download this as a JSON document. Okay, Adam, that worked for you? Yep, so you can always go back through the credential screen. Credentials, edit to get it. Okay, so we've set up the keys. We've set up our consent screen. We've done all the work in the Google console. So again, this process, I have documented it. These slides are on D2L for you to reference in your assignment. So we've put them in app settings.json. So now we've got to do two things, and this should work. Megan, I'll have to get you to share that with me. Because yes, that would be very nice to have. So we now need to install the Nuget package for Google Auth and add a few lines of code to our startup. We should be done. So go back to my project. I'm going to click on Tools, Nuget Package Manager. And instead of, we could use the console, but I'm going to use the GUI for this. I want to manage the Nuget packages for the solution. So again, that was under Tools, Nuget Package Manager, Manage Nuget Packages for Solution. So that'll bring up this window. It shows us currently what dependencies we have. So it should default to the Installed tab. If we click on Browse, what we want to search for Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Authentication. I'll put this in the chat as well. Hopefully without multiple dots this time. And it will bring up this package called Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Authentication.Google, created by Microsoft, 48.5 million downloads, contains middleware to support Google's OpenID and Oauth 2 workflows. So I'm going to click on that. It asks me which project do I want to install it in, so I'll just check. I only have one project. It shows the latest version. And I can just click the install button here. Pardon me. Says it's going to make some changes to your project. Do we want to go ahead? I'll say, yeah, okay. I'm going to accept the license terms. It's not a big package, so it installs very quickly, downloads from the source library. The source code is right here. So it's It's all open source. We could go and look at the code if we want. So now we just need to do a bit of configuration when our application starts to enable the Google sign-in option. So in our Solution Explorer, we open up our startup file. We've got this configure services method. We modified this a little bit a couple weeks ago. We turned our require account confirmation. We toggled that from true to false. And we added in authorization. We added role management. We're also going to enable in here Google Auth. So in our services, we're going to add authentication. We're going to add an authentication service. So now when I type .add, I get the ability to add Google. Well, that's what we want. We're going to add Google, and now we need to set the options. What options do we need to provide to the Google authentication? There's two options we'll have to configure. What do you think those would be? Yeah, thanks, Chris, right? The ID and secret that we just set up in the Google Developer Portal. So we'll set up some options here. So in here, first we need to reference Google Auth section in our app settings.json. So we're going to use this iConfiguration section object. So our configuration class has a method called getSection. So that's reading the nodes in our app settings. So we want the section Authentication Google. And the colon indicates the nesting. The Google section is inside of the authentication section in app settings.json. And now we can see the library is looking for, it's got properties for the client ID and the client secret. So it's now asking us for a key value from our configuration, from our JSON file. So we're going to read the client ID. We're going to grab both of those key values from our configuration. So I'm going to save that change, and then we should be able to try this out. If we've done it correctly, and I think we have, then our Google login should be ready to roll. Let's give it a try. So now notice my page reloads. That old message we had that there were no external services configured, it disappears. And now we've got a Google button. And that button appears on both the register and login. I'm going to go to register. I'll click Google. It brings up the Google OAuth consent screen. It lists the name of our project. I'll pick a Google account. And it comes back here to our external login handler. It says I've successfully authenticated with Google. Please enter an email address and click register to finish. So just click on register. And now I'm logged in with a Google account. If we go and look in SQL Server, we'll find my account not in the Asp Net users table, if I look in Asp Net users, we won't see my Google account. Here's the Asp Net users table that we were working with in our last lesson. And it's only got, oh, I'm sorry, pardon me. It is here. There's my admin, here's my customer. Here's my Ontario Tech user. Notice there's no password though, right? Because Google is managing the password. If I look at Asp Net user logins, it now says this user ID authenticates with Google. So I do get a user in Asp Net users. I misspoke earlier, but I also now get a related record in the Asp Net user logins. So this user account with this ID is tracked as a Google account. So what we've done, what this Google implementation, you'll basically be doing the same thing in your assignment. You're going to create a new project in the Google Developer Console. You'll configure the Oauth consent screen. You'll generate a set of API keys, add them. No, Megan, it's not in any role. We would have to override that. But for our purposes, this is fine. Because as a customer, they'll still be able to check out, but notice they don't have access to categories or products. So that's what we want. So they're not specifically in any role, but that's okay. So I will push my code up to GitHub. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and then when we come back, I'm going to give you your lab. And you're free to do the lab in class, and I will stick around and can help and answer questions. You can also do the lab at home on your own time. It's due on Sunday. So we'll take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back and we will look at it.